right, hello everybody. This is Mark Dustin, and our podcast Help is on the way with
Kevin Ballman. And today we've got two stories, as usual.
Two stories about featuring, centering around women.
Yeah, I've got a story about a climbing expedition in Russia on Lenin Peak. Led, in particular, this story is focused on a crew of 8 women who are going to try to climb this peak without the men.
Excellent, and that's really interesting. And I have another story about a woman who was involved in she was actually the victim of a hijacking. She was a flight attendant in 1985, and she helped save some lives. Very interesting story about her experience and what happened there.
Well, let's get started.
All right. How about me? I'll go first with this one. This is a really interesting story. I came across this story a couple of weeks ago and just found it really fascinating because do you remember in the 80s, probably in the late 70s and the 80s, there was sort of seemed like for people who grew up, were younger then, you might remember that there sort of seemed to be a lot of hijackings, the Middle East and areas like that, a lot of...
Yeah, I feel like, there's been a lot of fear and focus on terrorism in the United States, since September 11th. But for the rest of the world, it feels like terrorism was already an issue that people had to deal with since I was a kid, at least.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, from Northern Ireland on to, the Middle East and other areas like that. And we definitely in the United States have sort of been able to avoid a lot of that for a long time, and certainly until 9/11, Timothy McVeigh as well, some things like that. But in this case, we're talking about, and also one interesting thing about all of that, the earlier hijackings and things like this, is that the groups tended to be a little more nationalist. They weren't so much sort of religious ideologists. So there seemed to be less in the way of suicide attacks. Which of course we saw with 9/11, and we've seen many more around the world since, but it was more based on ideology, which, in the end, what I'm trying to say is that it seemed like a lot of these folks were trying to get out of this. Maybe they'd go to jail, they may even get hanged or something,
but they didn't want to die.
But they weren't going to die in the act.
Right.
And this story sort of comes up, and it reminded me of all of that, and that sort of time in history. And it's a really interesting story about, this woman. So this woman named Neerja Bhanot, she was the head purser, which is like the chief flight attendant.
Oh, okay.
Of this Pan Am flight, and the flight was flying from the flight at the time. I don't remember Pan Am that well. I mean, I remember Pan Am, but it was kind of funny because the flight was named the Empress of the Sea, which I didn't know they named flights like they do trains and
Empress of the Sea. But it's in the air.
It's in the air.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit of conflict of interest. Right. And it's sort of not on point exactly.
Right.
But it was quite a long haul flight. It was a 747, and it would run this route between Bombay, which is now Mumbai, India, and to Karachi in Pakistan. It would land, it would refuel, it would take off, go to Frankfurt, Germany, and then it would go on to New York City. So I mean, it's a serious haul.
Mm-hmm.
So it's September 5th, 1985, and Bhanot, I think in Indian names it's sort of like Korean names. I think his first name is the second. I could be wrong, so apologies if I'm getting this wrong. She had become a flight attendant a few years earlier, about a year earlier, and she had gone to school in Miami. She had been a model in India, she did quite a lot of modeling, but simple like product stuff, and it's not like the kind of modeling where that's going to be your big time career. And she ended up also deciding she wanted to be a flight attendant, and she quickly was raised to the level of the senior on the flight, senior flight attendant. So she's on the plane, and it's a 747, and there are 380 passengers on the flight, as well as 13 crew members. And they've taken off from Bombay, and they've landed in Karachi, and they're refueling and doing the usual stuff. I assume they either emptied the plane and then reboarded it, or they left the folks on and jumped off whoever was getting off, and then we're starting to put the people on the plane that were coming on, and the plane's pretty much full at this point, and they're about to close the doors and take off, I guess, and 4 men posing as security guards board the plane. Now, it wasn't easy at this. There had been hijacking attempts for years now.
Sure.
So it wasn't easy to get through, but they were able to sort of do the whole wear the security, go through the security checkpoints, wearing security uniforms and all this other stuff. And they get on the plane, and she is apparently right there, as anyone who's gotten on an airplane before sees the flight attendants right there greeting everybody, and she's right there, and they immediately grab her and say, "You need to announce to the passengers, we're taking over this plane."
Wow, they didn't waste any time. It was just right on and instantly.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
they didn't let the plane get off the ground or anything.
No, the plane's still. I mean, I imagine it wasn't sort of like it must have. I'm imagining it was like a ramp, like the
right
staircase.
from the tarmac or something.
Yeah, because I don't recall. I think back then, maybe because now they have the long
walkway.
The walkways.
Though it is a 747 is a jumbo jet, right? So that's a pretty tall plane.
It's a really tall plane.
Yeah,
it's quite a hike up to the top. But
that's Air Force One is 747, right? And they walk right up from the tarmac.
Up it.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm imagining that's probably what it was. I can't say for sure. So these 4 guys storm the plane. I'm sure it's a bit of chaos right away. By the way, they're from they were members of a Palestinian nationalist militant group that had already been designated and well known as a terrorist group, and it was named after its founder, which was called the Abu Nidal Organization. And throughout from the 70s, like early 70s to early 90s, they actually carried out around 90 acts of terrorism in around 20 countries. I mean, this group was.
It's interesting. I remember hearing about Palestinian, terrorist organizations. I do not recall the name of this one.
Yeah, I guess the guy's Abu Nidal, and he was a pretty bad dude. So, so they quickly grab her at the door, and they direct her to make this announcement to the passengers over the intercom. Before we go any further, I want to point out something. This Bhanot is 2 days before her 23rd birthday. She's 22 years old. So not only is she clearly a woman, a capable woman, she's already elevated to the status of the chief of this flight, the highest ranking member of the cabin crew. She's also 22.
Very young.
Very young.
Yeah.
So she is directed to make this announcement over the intercom, and she does this to let the passengers of the plane know that they're being hijacked. But within this, apparently Pan Am, and I'm assuming it was typical back then and probably today, has a hijacking code.
Oh, okay.
And whatever that code is, she says it over the intercom while she's telling the passengers something. I don't know what she's telling them. I don't know what the hijackers wanted her to say, but whatever it was, it might have been just, hey, everybody, you need to sit down. It's immediately in your seats. She wasn't announcing the hijacking because whatever her code was what let the pilots know, who were already in the cockpit. They heard this because they hear the internet announcements.
Right.
And they know this is happening.
Yeah.
So they have a hatch in the roof, and they scramble out. So her forethought, obviously, she'd only been flying for a year or so, but she was obviously, and who expects this?
Right.
But she's obviously had the forethought to think, like, I have to run this code. The pilots jump out of the plane. No longer can the plane fly as is. It's grounded, which immediately saved lives, because there's some, if you look at you read different stories, some of them say the guys wanted to fly to Cyprus and then, to try to get some Palestinian militants out of prison and to use these passengers as leverage, and others say they did that, but they also intended to, like, fly it into a building in Israel. I don't know whether the Cyprus one is definitely seems definitely true. I'm not sure about the flying it into a building thing. Wasn't really a thing back then yet, but at the same time, you don't know. But either way, she's immediately thrown a wrench in the works for these guys.
Right. It's, obviously this was not an easy thing to do as a terrorist, but that what my immediate thought was when you said that they came up and instantly told her, it seems like they should have let the plane get off the ground, but perhaps as security people, they weren't supposed to be on the flight. That would have been very suspicious, right? So
that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. You're right.
If they had been passengers and bought tickets, then this could have turned out even worse, right?
Right. Yeah, and presumably because of security, even
Right.
even then, they wouldn't have been able to get the weapons in the plane. Blah blah blah.
Right.
But that's a really good point, because they could have taken off if they had found a way to conceal themselves or anything,
Right.
and wait till they got off the ground. That would have changed the dynamic of this.
Right.
And one of the fabulous things about this story, just sort of kind of looking at it from an overview perspective as we continue on, is that, like, she's immediately messed all this up for these
Right.
lunatics, which is fabulous. She's already screwed up your plan. And these aren't people who like have much of a plan, right?
Right.
I mean, let's assume these guys went, okay, they got there, and then we're just going to do this, and it's going to be awful, and we're going to do some awfulness. But I doubt they really had what's going to happen if, like, an intelligent, quick-thinking flight attendant gets the pilots out of the plane.
Right. Did they know that these airlines had these kinds of, plans and codes in place, and maybe they just hoped that she wouldn't be smart enough to do it, or maybe they didn't even know that airlines were as prepared as they were. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, because they let her talk on the intercom.
Yeah.
They must not have had any clue that this woman's going to be able to cue the pilots.
Right.
It's interesting. It's interesting for sure. So they right away they realize they're kind of screwed. Quickly, this is already turning on its head, and so they go and they identify an Indian American pastor who's on the plane, and they drag him to the exit door and they shoot him.
Oh, geez.
Now, keep in mind, at this point, I'm visualizing it like this, because there's only so much information about what happened here, but I'm visualizing like this. The staircase was there. It's probably been removed at this point, but the door is still open.
Right.
So they shoot him and they throw him out of the plane. That's a pretty high drop, 30-foot drop or something.
Yeah, it's from the pictures I've seen, it's quite a ways down.
They're big planes.
Yeah.
They're tall planes. So they kill this guy, and that's a warning. A, they're announcing that they're on this plane, I guess. And B, they're insisting that a new flight crew be sent out to fly this plane. And so they can have their demands met. As you'd expect, of course, the authorities show up and everybody starts to stall and try to negotiate and whatever's going on with all that stuff. There's not a lot of information as to how all that played out. But on the plane, Bhanot, she continues to be quick thinking and heroic. One of the things she does is she goes to the flight manual that the flight attendants have. She secretly tears out the page that explains how to open an exit door and how to inflate the slide. And she goes to apparently a passenger or a couple of passengers, and she lets them know, shows them that she's got what it is, puts it in one of their magazines, hides it in one of their magazines, basically saying, if you have to read this, this will be how you get open up the door and get out of the plane. You guys do it if I can't.
Man, that's amazing, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The forethought of that, and especially considering that she's obviously having to think, what if I'm just not there, or what if I'm just not alive?
Yeah, and she's tons of pressure,
Massive pressure.
young, 22-year-old under an immense amount of pressure,
Absolutely,
and fear,
and the fear and the chaos.
Yeah,
because this kind of thing, it doesn't look even a little bit like what it looks like in a Hollywood movie. It's just chaos. So at this point, the terrorists realize, as was always the case in these instances, and I assume today still is that the most valuable negotiating tools on the plane are the Americans. They've got a U.S. government that is very powerful. They'll come in and want the local government to do anything they can, and they'll put pressure on them. So they direct Bhanot and the other flight attendants to go and collect everyone on the plane's passports, 380 passports, and to bring them back to them. And their idea is, we're going to sort through these. We're going to ID whoever's an American. We're going to pull them out. And we're just probably going to, I mean, we can imagine what horrors they're going to start. They're going to be using them as leverage and showing how.
Yeah, shooting one at a time until they get what they want.
That kind of thing, right? So she does this. The other flight attendants as well, who aren't named in this, but clearly are heroic as well. And they find 46 American passports, and they hide them.
Jeez.
They peel each one out away from the bunch, and they stuff a bunch of them under a seat, and they throw the rest down a garbage chute in the plane. I mean, just
unbelievable,
life-saving stuff right away. So now these hijackers have no way to easily identify Americans and single them out. So the standoff lasts for about 17 hours. At this point, it's dark out, and it's dark outside. It's around 9 o'clock at night, and the hijackers are starting to get nervous. It's one of those situations. Who wants to be on a plane on a tarmac in Karachi? I mean, you can imagine. It's
17 hours, hungry, thirsty.
Right.
The bath,
people on this plane.
Yeah, everything's going to heck at this point.
Yeah, and they're now starting to become babysitters for these people, caretakers, and it's not pleasant, I'm sure. And but at that point, the plane, which had been, I think it had been shut down because, I don't know if the engine had been on or whatever, but the auxiliary power, which had been powering the lights and everything, it runs out. The lights go out. The batteries die, and the lights of the plane go out. Now think about this: you're in a interior fuselage of a plane with all these people, and it's 9 o'clock at night, so it's dark. And now it's dark. Now the lights just went out. So these guys start thinking, okay, this is a signal. They don't realize that it's just the batteries dying.
Oh, they think that this was done to them.
They think exactly. They think this is a signal that military commandos are about to storm the plane. Oh, jeez. So they just randomly start shooting inside the plane and lighting off explosives, which just, can you imagine?
No, that's insane. I mean, it's one of those things. So, again, this is just misfortune. I mean, they didn't have the wherewithal to know that they were only going to have so much power.
Absolutely.
Before, the batteries would die and the lights would go out. And so they are making this false assumption that they're about to be stormed.
Yeah, and it also sort of speaks to you can imagine that although, yes, there have been terrorist attacks, and yes, there have been things like this that happened, now there are response teams who have, books of what, checkbook lists of what to do. And so you can imagine that now, even a few years later, they probably would have learned from something like this and said, no, we have to plug the plane in. We have to run a line to the plane. And we have to tell them what's going to happen.
Right. Hey, you are almost out of power.
Because otherwise, we're at risk of this sort of thing happening. And I imagine this kind of thing is probably in the training books for the people who run these things today. Yeah. To make sure that they...
I would imagine that the trainings today have the experience of all those previous incidents, and you have to incorporate that into it. But back then, they must not have encountered this situation where they were on a standoff for 17 hours and the power went out.
Yeah. Just something they didn't anticipate, and now all of a sudden, nobody on either side of the wall here has anticipated this, and now all of a sudden, chaos ensues. So, again, Bhanot, presence of mind. I mean, imagine complete darkness, plane fuselage, people shooting off automatic weapons and explosives, and like 400 people freaking out. She opens the exit door. She sees an opportunity because she's not near one of them, I guess, or one of the. And I'm not sure which door she opened. I think it was the front one, the one in the front, the one you come in the front left of the plane, but I'm not sure of that. And she begins, and she activates the slide, and she immediately, rather than, she's number one, she's standing right there.
So she could just bail right then, just jump out and save herself.
She could do that in a second, and not to say, okay, you probably falter for it to some degree, but with that amount of chaos, you may not.
Right.
You know? I mean, she have to live with it, but if she was comfortable, but she didn't. She stayed, and she immediately started helping passengers get out of the plane, helping them get out of this plane as quickly as possible. And she did. She was able to do it. She helped get a ton of passengers. And by, again, there are other people who were instrumental in helping this too. The other flight attendants were there, and but she was the one who sort of was the leader in the presence of mind to do all this. And she, so as the story goes, she, at some point, I don't know how many people were off, the terrorists kind of finally figured out what was going on. And they saw her doing this, and they went up to her and they shot her. They killed her right away. They grabbed her by the ponytail and they shot her.
Ugh,
which,
awful.
I mean, obviously the horrors of that are unspeakable. At the time, it's well documented that apparently at the time she was getting 3 unaccompanied children out. I don't know why this has been mentioned several times. It's a very heroic thing, but she was. Some say she was shielding them. I could see it because the bullets are being shot off. And she's getting them out, and she's shot and killed immediately. And she dies. So the next thing that happens is the hijackers run out of ammunition. They've just been shooting wildly, and you can imagine. So they've run out of ammunition, and the Pakistani military storms the plane, and they capture the hijackers, these guys are eventually sentenced to death, and that eventually and later that was commuted to life in prison, and then for the hijackers sort of quote unquote escaped. One was later known to have killed by a drone strike much later, and another was captured and turned over to the U.S. and I don't know if he was still alive, but was sent to a U.S. federal prison. But in regard to Neerja Bhanot, she in her heroism, approximately 300 passengers of 380. So clearly there was a lot of people did die, but about 300 passengers did survive, and of the 46 American passports that they collected, only 2 Americans died. And obviously the nationality of who lived and who died is not what's important. It's not important that not in the sense that it's just sad that anyone died, but the very fact that she was so deliberate in trying to protect the targets, those particular targets, it's sort of an additional amount of heroism to have saved so many.
Very selfless, because you would, thinking about it, it seems that she could possibly have saved others by giving up the ones they wanted.
Good point.
I mean, it's who knows what would happen, but when somebody has guns and explosives and tells you to do something, most people do it.
Right.
And she didn't. She acted extremely selflessly.
I think that's a really good point, because if she had been the type of person, and I'm not, who made the mental calculation to say, if I give up these Americans, maybe I'll save everybody else.
Right.
Because she could have thought that way.
Sure.
They'll start shooting the Americans, and that's going to be tragic and terrible. But hey, at least
the American government will say, okay,
right,
let's give these guys something.
Maybe, yeah,
right.
Yeah. And so, but of course, that also could turn the other way around.
Yeah.
Because what she realized, what she knew, was that the leverage for the Americans was to get pilots. If you get pilots, everybody's at risk. There's you're in the air.
Yeah, they're probably going to kill I mean, what is the point of having 300 and something passengers on the plane with you, that could potentially derail this thing at some point?
Right. Absolutely. And so her forethought obviously saved an incredible amount of people's lives. so many people are indebted to her, and it's very nice to know that she was, after her death, she was awarded an Indian award, the Ashok Chakra Award for bravery, and it's the highest award a person can receive. She is the first, I believe, the first woman to have ever received it, and the youngest person to have ever received it. And she was also granted honors in the U.S. and in Pakistan for her courage in alerting the pilots so they could escape. And in 2004, she was the India Post Office issued a stamp to commemorate her. I think there's a square named after her, maybe in Mumbai, and sort of speaking to where this comes from, who she is, because she isn't an anomaly. Her family, because she's a product of something. Her family used the insurance money they received after her death to start a trust in her honor, which presents 2 awards each year, and one of which is to a flight attendant worldwide who acts beyond the call of duty, and the other is to an Indian woman who is faced with her own hardship, but at the same time selflessly gives to other women that are in a similar distressful situation.
Sounds like an amazing family. That's what a way to take the memory of somebody that you love and turn it into something, so great.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and also the fact that she is, her legacy is able, it's reviving her legacy. Her legacy is not going to be easily forgotten because of this. I mean, yes, there's a square, and that's all great stuff, but I mean, we're talking 1985 here now.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of time away from today. Easy to forget anything that happened in 1985. That far off, something that was across the world or whatever. And so many things, as we've found in our stories past, have happened that are commemorated that are ridiculous. That we get commemorations of people who failed miserably. And this woman was heroic and wonderful and an important person that certainly deserves our remembrance.
Yeah, and it sounds like with this trust that people will remember her, and it'll be brought up each time they award somebody, these things. They'll learn about who this person was.
Absolutely.
So keeps it alive. I did see when you told me about this, I looked up and I see that there was also a film.
There was a film. Yeah. It was 2000, I can't remember, 2005.
I mean, is it a fictionalization of it? Is it
I didn't read much into it. I get the impression that the film is a fictionalization.
Okay.
I get the impression that the film is, I mean, the front cover of the film, the artwork, it looks like a Liam Neeson movie.
Oh, right.
It looks a little bit like obviously it's great that she's being honored in this way, but you know how these things go. The story has to be changed to fit, 3-act structure and
right.
So I imagine I can't sign off on this, but I don't think the family was like, great film, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for painting my daughter as exactly who she was.
Yeah. She was a super spy in the movie, and in reality, she was much more real and, an actual person.
You can imagine, terrified.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Because, we've talked a lot recently, because of recent events, about sort of people visualizing a certain heroism or what some sort of act would be like Civil War in America. That would be great because this would be cool. It's like, no, this would be chaos.
Yeah.
Everyone would be terrified.
And you'll probably die.
Yes.
And be forgotten.
Yes, and you'll be dying forgotten.
Yeah.
Nothing here, there's no glory in this. And so I think that is exactly, I imagine, I have not seen the film, so I don't mean to, to prejudice it, but I can imagine for audiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably slicker than it was.
Well, that is quite a heroic woman, and it's an awesome story. And I've got one, if you are ready to move on, that is also about some amazing women.
I am, and this being and yours is yours now. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. Yours is about several women involved.
Yeah, there is one woman in particular who is kind of, the main focus of the story, and her name is Elvira Shatayeva. I believe that's how you would pronounce it.
Yeah.
The story starts in
Russian.
Yes, Russian.
Okay, yeah.
And the story starts in 1974, June of 1974, in the southern part of the Soviet Union. This is near what is now Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. And this is, during the Cold War. And Russians and Western nations don't really know each other well and don't understand each other. There's a lot of competition between the nations, and Russia is, feeling that they need to show the world. It seems constantly at that point that the Soviet way of life, the communist way of doing things, is as successful as, the capitalist Western nations.
This is an interesting time in our history, especially, and it's very, very heightened in the Cold War, is that exact thing, that sort of like, we are strong and let's prove some stuff.
Right.
It's the Olympics. It's
space race.
Space race. It's when Hitler, broadcast television for the first, his speech, and it's like, it's all this perception and propaganda buildup that is kind of fizzled today. It's probably different. It's different today.
And I would imagine some of this is an outward projection. So you want the U.S. people in the U.S. to see and say, "Oh, those Russians." But I would imagine a lot of it is also internal, so that Russians can feel proud of the achievements of their comrades.
Yeah, what we're doing works, and here's why.
Yeah.
And you think it's not working, but look what we just accomplished. And and to our internal people, hey, you have something to be super proud of.
Exactly.
And you can wave your flag.
Exactly. And so they have a large group of climbers, approximately 230 climbers, has assembled in the Pamirs, which is a mountain range, and there's a bunch of tall mountains down there, very, very tall peaks. They've come to tackle Lenin Peak, which is a 7,000 meter peak. It's 23,406 feet to be exact. It's not particularly technical, but it's still a big, tall mountain, subject to, the same kinds of bad weather that any other tall mountain gets. And, altitude sickness and all those kinds of things always play a role. Now, there's approximately 170 climbers from Western nations, with the remainder of about 60 from Eastern Europe and Russia. There's 19 Americans there, and, there are other contingents. There's Swiss, there's Japanese, and so there's just a whole bunch of people climbing, and they know this isn't a super technical peak, but it's still difficult. And in this instance, there is a crew of 8 Russian women, and they are led by this Elvira Shatayeva, and she is in her mid-30s, and she has the achieved Master of Sport, which is a certification. Basically, you're at the top of your game for whatever it is in the Russian Federation at that time. She's described as being strong and confident and warm. The people that met her there, she was inclusive and inviting. The women's team was, they would be doing calisthenics and singing songs together while, in the mornings. But they were very serious, and they had a lot to prove. They were going to not only climb this peak, but they were going to climb the peak, traverse it, and then descend down the other side. And this was going to be done by themselves without the aid of the men. This is one of the first times, if not the first time, that the Russian women were allowed to do this.
All these teams are all here. This is national news. I mean, international news kind of thing, or is this just the first time because we're trying this because it's specific to women? And
I don't know about that aspect of it. Whether the women climbing was a news thing or not.
I see.
I did see the New York Times had something from 1974 about this.
Okay.
So, but that's after the fact, after what has transpired has made news. This story, by the way, has been largely forgotten until, from my experience, there was a CNN story in January that was really good that I read. This is how I discovered it. But prior to that, there's hardly anything that talks about this, especially in depth. And I
wonder if that has something to do with the Russians kind of not wanting anyone to know about it.
That could be. That could be right. And it's, so, I mean, this is a tragic story.
Yeah.
And I should kind of step back and say that. And I may have trouble getting through it, Mark, because I've read this about 6 times, trying to make it through all the way without starting to choke up. Yeah. So I'm just warning everybody now.
2 heavy hitter stories today,
back to back. Yes, it's this is a tearjerker. So, there are many different contingents that are going to climb this peak. They're not all super well coordinated. When the Americans came, their radios were confiscated upon entering the country.
Oh boy!
So they had to borrow radios, underpowered radios from other teams. This leads to some miscommunication throughout the story. But Elvira knew that the men thought that that a women's team would never succeed in climbing this peak by themselves. So the Russians have something to prove, and the Russian women have even more to prove.
Yes.
Because they want to prove both that Russians are great, and she wants to prove to both Russian and non-Russian men that women are strong and that they can do this.
Well, and doesn't it sort of says the same thing that with a lot of, women, African Americans, African, people of African descent, etc., they have to do that extra 20-30% or more just to get the same amount of recognition.
Yeah, you can't just be as good.
Yeah.
You have to be better.
Yeah.
And she has already led a team of women on another climb, and it was an all-women climb. However, I believe they said this was the first time they were allowed to go without the men, that even though she led a team of women on a previous climb, which was a first for Russian women, and it was the first all-women climb of this particular mountain in 1972. It was the first all-women's ascent of a 7,000-meter peak ever. In Tajikistan in 1972. So she's an experienced climber. She's very good. And I should also go into kind of the difference. Another difference, here is that the Americans had nylon tents with aluminum poles, big thick down jackets.
Yeah.
Up-to-date climbing equipment.
Cutting edge stuff of the era.
Yeah.
70, which still is pretty different than today, but it's a lot better than
the Russians, they were using cotton tents with wood poles. The doors or the flaps, the tent flaps, and
you tie them together probably.
Yes, they are not zippers.
Oh my goodness.
So they are going to climb these, peaks with equipment that is probably from 3 decades earlier.
Unbelievable.
Their climbing boots are big, heavy boots with nails through the soles.
Oh my goodness. And
so they're not climbing with crampons.
And the weight of it all.
Yes, and the weight of it all. Plus, since they are going to do a traverse, they can't leave equipment behind.
Right.
They've got to carry, they're not just going up and then back down to the same camp. And this is even though it's not a particularly technical climb, it is a big, long climb. So it takes them days, to go from, base camp to camp 1 to camp 2, that kind of thing, just like any other big climb would. Now, they didn't know what was coming, and the whole thing starts with an earthquake that sets off an avalanche. And that avalanche buries one of the Americans up to his neck. And
oh my goodness.
he survives.
Are they at base now? They've gone to
They
like an upper
are,
base.
I believe they were between, I think it was Camp 1 and Camp 2. They are basically shuttling equipment between the different camps.
Oh, when you're on the lower section, you have to you kind of have to get a train going to get enough food and enough equipment up to the where you're going to make your true ascent.
Exactly. So, you shuttle, you climb up to one. Plus, you can't stay at altitude too long. So you have to climb up and bring gear up there, and then you have to retreat back down, stay for a while. Then you can climb. Then you can climb back up and stay for a while. And then so they and as they're going, they're typically you're going with less and less from each camp to each camp. So they survived that avalanche, and maybe it's between base camp and Camp 1. But two of them jump into a crevasse, and then one of them is buried up to his neck. They dig him out. One of them is injured.
When the avalanche comes, they jump into a crevasse.
Yeah, to get out of the avalanche.
Oh
Two of them do. This is one of the American contingents, and one of them's injured, and Shetayeva kind of takes charge. This man is injured. We need to do this, and here's she's basically it sounds like a very strong personality. So she has the men doing what she's telling them to do.
She's a natural born leader.
Yeah, she's a natural born leader, exactly. And her husband is also part of the expedition, and his name is Vladimir Shatayev. But he is not climbing with her because this is going to be the women on their own. Now, that's not the first earthquake. I mean, not the last earthquake or the last avalanche that they'll encounter on this climb. Nor is it the worst part of the whole thing. So just a day after the first avalanche, a second avalanche hits an American party of 4 while they slept on their climb. 2 are buried. John Gary Ullin is killed, while the other 2 in that party are trying to dig the 2 out that were buried and then resuscitate the one. Another avalanche hits, sweeping away their tent and burying one of them again.
Oh my God.
They end up having to spend 2 nights in a snow cave while a Russian helicopter does supply drops to them. They eventually, get out the three of the 4. So that is, as far as I know, the first death on this climb, in which there's going to be many.
It speaks a lot to, because we know that people who do this, like people who truly do this, it's not a choice in a way. It's sort of like so ingrained in who they are.
And you have to expect that people are going to die.
Yeah.
And as you go through this story, I mean, when you read it on CNN, there's even ones who survive this often die in other accidents.
So 10
it's
years
not
and that later. They're,
right.
Yeah.
5 Estonians are caught in another avalanche, and 3 of them die.
Wow.
So they're up to 4 dead from avalanches at this point. Many are changing their climbing plans accordingly because of the weather. The Russian women do not. They are committed.
Mm-hmm.
The Russian women leave base camp on July 30th.
And I'm sorry, let's interject here really quickly the fact that, maybe they would have gone anyway no matter who they were, or maybe they're feeling that extra pressure of, this is our opportunity. All eyes, at least from the men and the Russian climbing, community, are on us. We have to prove ourselves. If we walk away, there's a lot of people who are going to be going, see, they couldn't do it. Women can't do it.
And I think I think that was kind of a Russian ethos, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. That once you commit to something, you do it. This is like almost stoicism.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's just kind of how I've always read that behind the Iron Curtain was just, life isn't awesome. It just is, and you do it. That's kind of how I've always pictured things. And so I think there's some of that, just we are Russian. We are going to do this.
Yeah.
And we are women, so we're definitely going to do this to prove it to everybody.
It reminds me of the horse in Orwell's 1984, who says,
Right.
"Well, we're having trouble. I'll work harder." Okay, horse. Well, there's something else. Okay, well then I'll work harder, like that, because it's a socialist manifesto. So you're looking at this saying, what's the solution to this? Do more.
Do
work
more,
harder.
do better.
There's and there's the mindset. Keep
Exactly.
moving.
And so they leave base camp July 30th, and they get to Camp 1. They leave the 31st. They leave Camp 1, and they climb. They start up what's called the Lipkin Rocks route, and they climbed until August 3rd. Things are going well, where they take a rest day. They've got the heavy load because they got to traverse. There's an American team behind them on that same day, who radios and states that conditions are cloudy, and route finding is getting difficult.
Okay.
So things are starting, to change weather-wise. On the 4th, a big storm is forecast, and from base camp, they radio to everybody and say it's recommended that you come back. Don't continue. But the Russian women at that point, after their rest day, have continued on, and they are 400 feet below the summit by another climber who is descending at that point.
Oh, wow.
And he says to them, kind of jokingly, it was I believe it was an American. It was an English speaking person, and he jokingly says something about it being hard to breathe up there.
Yeah.
Because they're at like 23,000 feet.
Right.
And Elvira says, "We are strong. We are women." That's her response. She's just, they're going.
Yeah. But it's also we have to remind ourselves, because we don't experience it every day, what 400 feet is.
At that altitude.
And in those conditions. 400 feet's not 400 feet.
No,
it's not like going down to the long driveway, into your long driveway to get the mail.
It sounds like, when you hear that 400 feet should be, of course you're going to make it.
Yeah.
Why would you not make it 400
it's
feet?
right there.
But people have turned around 100 feet from the summit of a mountain before.
Yeah.
Because of weather, when they say that last 100 feet might take me 2 hours. And in that 2 hours, I could be dead.
You could be dead.
Yeah. So, due to issues with the radios, however, not everybody has received this warning about the weather. And one of those is the American group that is below the women.
They got their radios confiscated.
Exactly.
And they ended up with these low power, ragtag radios they borrowed.
That's right. And now, coming from the opposite side of the summit, which I think is the way the women were intending to descend, is a Japanese group. So they're part way up. The Americans are part way up, and the Russian women are very close to the summit.
Yeah.
On August 5th, so no, people aren't really sure what's going on. They're hoping that people are descending. On August 5th, the Russian women's team radios from the summit, saying they're having difficulty navigating, and they're going to set up camp on the summit. This was always their intention, was to bivouac on the summit.
Yeah.
This was part of their plan to climb and traverse the mountain. So they were going to they were always planning to sleep on top of this mountain.
Yeah.
Which seems, kind of crazy.
Right.
But
because these are exposed mountains, entirely exposed to weather.
Oh yeah.
Again, we're thinking about, for anyone who isn't familiar with mountaineering, I think about mountains as where I go skiing or something, and there's trees everywhere, and there are places to hide. You're so exposed.
Yeah, 23,000 feet. There's potentially a lot of wind, and it's very cold at night. So they are encouraged at that point by the head of the Russian contingent down at base camp they need to descend. You can't stay at the summit. You need to descend. So they try to descend, but they can't see. They can't see.
Right.
They're having trouble. They only manage to get a few hundred feet, and the conditions get worse They have 70 to 80 mile an hour winds, and apparently, well, there's a few inches of snow down at base camp. It's measured in the feet up high. So
well, and there's no reference. It's whiteout condition.
Yep.
You can't see anything, and there's no reference point.
right.
Right, because there's no trees, there's nothing. Maybe the occasional rock. There's nothing. You can't even tell whether you're on a path or whether you're standing over a cliff.
Yeah, I mean, it makes the going very slow because one wrong step, you head in the wrong direction, and it can be hours of backtracking, or it can lead to your death because you can end up sliding down, something where you can't get back up, or right off a cliff, or into a pile, into a rock pile or crevasse, whatever.
Yeah, and even communicating with each other is almost impossible.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're just yelling in the wind to each other. So there, this is still August 6th. Now, on that same day, there was another contingent climbing, and it included an American, Swiss, I think 2 Swiss climbers, and then one other climber as well. The 2 of the 4 climbers get to the top or very, very close. I think they turn around just short of the summit and say, we got to go back. They had a hard deadline of, if we don't make it to the summit by this time, we turn around and get that guy there. So they start descending, and they pass this Eva Eisenschmidt of Switzerland on the way down, which was part of their group on the way up, but they had left them behind to try and summit quicker. But on the way down, they say, you've got to turn around and go down. I don't think she does. She ends up dying in the storm too. And this was in spite of heroic efforts to save her. So at this point, I think we are up to, is this 4 or 5 have died so far, I think.
Yeah.
Shatayeva from Russia radios that one of the Russian women is sick. Now they're told again, you need to descend, and if you can't move the woman who's ill, you need to leave her behind.
Oh yeah. For
the good of the group. They start descending slowly, all of them. However, one of them, Irina Lyubimetseva, freezes to death while holding a safety rope for the others.
Oh my gosh.
So their group of 8 is down to 7. But yeah,
I mean, it happens within an hour.
Oh yeah,
You're already freezing. Of course, you're already cold, so you're already halfway there. But
I'm sure she was in very bad shape, long before this happened. But I'm sure they're all in bad shape at this point. They can't dig any snow caves because the ground is, it's probably scoured clean.
Right.
Number one, there's probably not enough snow, and it's whatever is there is probably rock hard.
Yeah, wind swept. Yeah, wind bulletproof.
So they set up their cotton tents there. They're told again that they need to keep descending, but they try to
a tent in that weather, and we're not talking about today's. I'm imagining we're not talking about, because it's a cotton tent, an older tent. It's not like one of these dome tents that is designed for wind to whip over it, and even those don't do well. Right. When the wind gets really
this is from the pictures, it's a little bit more of a traditional looking tent, almost that triangular shape.
Yeah,
but it looked like they had a slight curve to the walls.
It's practically a sail.
Yeah, they end up with their tents being completely destroyed by the wind.
Right.
And between the 6th and the 7th, 2 more Russian women die. Mm-hmm. So they're down to 5. And at this point, all of their tents are shredded. They're gone. And they have 3 sleeping bags between the 5 women. And they are up still at 22,000 something feet.
Barely moved.
Barely moved.
Yeah.
The winds are...
And you're leaving these bodies behind. You have no choice.
Right, no choice. They're trying to huddle in 3 sleeping bags. And what's extremely sad at this point is that the Americans below them are unaware because of the radios.
Uh-huh.
They're not that far. I mean, it's a long distance in these kinds of conditions, but perhaps they would have tried had they known.
Yeah.
You know, they swear they hear cries for help. And so they're opening their tent and looking, and there's nobody there.
Right.
Now, the Japanese climbers on the other side had heard communications between the Russians. Unfortunately, they don't understand Russian. They do infer that there is an emergency.
Right, yeah.
And so they try, two of the four try to climb to go help.
Wow.
But they can't make it. It's so windy.
There's so much heroism.
Yes.
There's so much selfless heroism because because, we live in these fractured sort of countries, especially around then, Cold War, post-war, it's long, but still post-war Japan. It's been a long time, but still, we've got the tensions of the Cold War. We've got all of this happening, and you're looking at these groups of people who are committed to this sport and these achievements, and they don't even, and their lives are literally on the line now, and they see what they can do to help.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine being there, listening to a radio communication that you don't even understand,
Right.
and going and being on a mountainside that you can't even see because it's a whiteout, and going, it sounds like someone might need help. I better go check.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is amazing, and this is kind of timely in talking about this kind of selflessness and people.
It is.
Because I feel like, here in the U.S. we've been very divided and thinking of the other half of the country as enemies.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you put two people from each side, even maybe the most divisive ones, in situations like this, and you would see some heroism.
Unless you're talking pure sociopaths,
right?
The ones that are the most horrible human beings.
Yep.
You're right, because really, when it boils down to it, it's that we're all in this together. Why does it have to be so singular, such a thing,
right?
Like mountaineering and we're on a mountain for country men and women, for people of the world to come together and go, you know what, hey, I kind of just think we're all in this together.
Yeah, I need to go help this person.
I hear someone calling for help. I think I need to turn around. It doesn't really matter. I'm not going to check their voter ID card before I help them. I'm not going to see whether they. You're
probably not even gonna check their nationality or their religion or anything.
Yeah.
You're just going to help that person who needs it.
Right. I don't know what language they're speaking. I don't know what color they are. I don't know whether they're male, female, what their sexual orientation is.
Exactly.
I know nothing. This person needs help. And it doesn't have to be heroism help. That we have to remember as a society, and of course now getting onto a thing I don't want to, but to change the topic. But yeah, it doesn't always have to be that level of heroism. Can be a much more micro thing.
You don't have to get up at 2:00 in the morning with 80-mile-an-hour winds at 22,000 feet and put your life at risk, right?
To make someone's day a little better, right? Yeah, just out of decency.
And I think in something like a climbing expedition like this, the reason it's heroism is because it is such a heightened situation. It's everything is extremely focused. You're in this situation at the moment where things are going really bad.
Sure.
And it's not quite as abstract when you're in that situation. Whereas I think that's the difference in our society. It's an abstract thing. If you're conservative, liberals are other people, and if you're liberal, conservatives are other people. They're not. It's not necessarily your neighbor with their house on fire, because if your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't care.
Right. Well, it's a moment in time instead of a lifestyle.
Right.
Instead of a lifelong commitment to something. It's that reaction moment where you're going to do it now, but why don't you do it every day? Let's do this every day. And I think that this kind of story really, really, really should remind all of us of how people who, and I mean, whether you're talking about war and things have gone through to make our country and our countries around the world, safer and better and life better for people. um, the very fact that human beings are capable of this in the extreme means we are capable of it in the simplest possible terms every day.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, this is, as we mentioned, this is in the middle of the Cold War. I mean, our countries we're kind of enemies,
Very much so, yeah.
and we are certainly
very wary of one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're afraid a nuclear war is going to break out and, destroy all human life. So sadly, the American crew climbs up the next morning, when they get up and the weather's cleared, and they come across all 8 bodies.
Oh my God.
Now, so it's tragic. Here's the part where I have trouble. So the final few hours, there are accounts from the radio communications. So this starts on August 7th at about 8 a.m. This is when the Russian, Abalakov is his name, is pressing them to keep descending. Shatayeva, says 3 more are sick. Now there are only 2 of us who are functioning, and we are getting weaker. We would not leave our comrades after all they have done for us. So they're not going to leave them behind.
They stay.
They're moving, but they're moving very, very slowly because they're taking them with them.
Because they haven't died. If they had died, you know that even as difficult it'll be, you could look yourself in the mirror if you survive this because they died.
That's right.
And you left them.
Exactly.
But they're alive.
As long as they're alive, they're not going to leave them. At 10 a.m., Shatayeva says, "It is very sad here where it was once so beautiful." At noon, 1 more had died and 2 more are dying. And somebody radios through and says, "They are all gone now. That last asked, 'When will we see flowers again?' 2 others asked about their children. Now it is no use." So you can see why I have trouble with this.
Yeah.
At 5:30 that night, somebody radios through and says, "We are sorry. We have failed you. We tried so hard. Now we are so cold." In despair, Malakov promises that a rescue is underway, but they're days away.
Yeah.
This is now 5 p.m. I'm sorry, that was 3:30 p.m. 5 p.m. Transmission is unclear, but another woman seems to have died. 3 remained. Winds are estimated to be 80 to 100 miles per hour. Temperatures -30 to -40. 6:30, transmission comes through that another has died. We cannot go through another night. I do not have the strength to hold down the transmitter button.
Oh.
At 8:30, 8:30, now we are 2, and now we will all die. We are very sorry. We tried but could not. Please forgive us. We love you. Goodbye. And that is the last thing they hear from them. Somebody pushes the button 2 more times, but nothing comes through.
Can't speak. Yeah.
Nope. So in the end, I think it is 15 people in the region die. And it's amazing because, we've all heard about, what was that, the 1990, was that 1996? No, it was like 1990. The Everest expedition, when it became a big movie, that was shown in the IMAX cinemas, and they carried and they had to interrupt that whole making of that movie to try and go help with the rescue because something like 16 people died in that one. Mm-hmm. But hardly anybody remembers this one. But what really struck me on this story is these women, their commitment and their dedication to their goal and to each other. It's unbelievable. And, it's super tragic. There is one thing that they talk about. It's not only the pressure that they felt, and what they thought that they needed to do, but there is also potentially there was another issue that kind of got them into trouble, which is that as they're climbing, and this was at their rest day, so it's, I think, August 3rd, there is a Russian men's group that is pretty close behind them, seems to be kind of moving maybe a little bit slower than normal. And so the possibility is that the Russian women decide to take the rest day because they want the Russian men to go ahead, because they don't want the help of the Russian men. And so it's possible that they are a day behind because they took a day to let the Russian men go ahead of them. And had they summited the day before, they would have been on the way
Beat
down.
The weather. Yeah. So it's sort of speaking to the fact that they are placed simply because of, them being female. They are placed in a position where they have to again find a way to prove themselves and not leave the possibility that somebody in the aftermath can say, oh yeah, but women still can't do it because of what happened, and spin this in some way that sort of diminishes their. I
know I'm guilty of this. It can be with friends. It can be with my wife, my son, where I'll step in to help, and they didn't ask for it.
Right.
And so it's possible that they could have said, yeah, we might get ourselves in trouble, but we'll get ourselves out of trouble.
Right.
We don't need you here. We don't know for sure because, none of them survived. So we can't really know for sure what their thinking was.
And we don't know that, and we shouldn't indict the group of men who because they may have all been super supportive of the female team
absolutely.
And
I think this is more about
that's the
kind of like just the happenstance, like the small things that can turn something from a success to a tragedy.
Yeah.
Especially in these kinds of environments. And it's going back to your story, we could find similar things, about what would have happened if they had waited till the plane was in the air. What if they had not, hidden the American passports? What, how many different things? Or, what if somebody had communicated the fact that they were going to run out of power soon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's always so many. When you are able to deconstruct any of these things, there's always so many, there's so many paths that leave what if questions. And it's just the nature of anything that happens in life where circumstances did this.
Yeah.
What if all those things are true, but those what ifs are for naught because this is what happened.
That's right. Yeah. So it's not necessarily, the Russian men's fault. They may have had the best of intentions. Maybe they had no intentions. Maybe they were just taking their time. Yeah. We don't really know for sure. Mm-hmm. So, but it is what happened, and it's tragic. And the survivors of this, the people who got to meet them, some of the American women, one of them in particular, just said, "I didn't want to be as bossy as Shetayeva, but that was the kind of climber I wanted to be."
Uh-huh.
I mean, she was just this imposing, charismatic, strong, woman, and also very warm and welcoming. Just a sad, tragic event, but
the one of the things that sort of sticks with me is the apology at the end for not having made it, and I don't take that as nationalism. I don't necessarily take that as sort of like for the and maybe not even from a female perspective, to have proven themselves. I see it more so as, and maybe I'm entirely wrong here, but I see it more so as an apology to the people that they don't come back to.
Yeah, I mean, two of them asked about their kids, right?
Yeah, and the people who they don't come back to, and the people that they know will, who will be scarred by this, even if, and maybe even hesitate to climb next, or anything that the maybe even thinking more deeply, the young women and even young men who would see this and take up climbing to see it as a positive.
And perhaps, they know that their friends and one of their husbands is going to have to climb up, and find them.
Yeah.
Find their bodies and their things.
That's true.
So it is amazing. I mean, what they said at the end was really the thing that made this story for me, because it's almost, I mean, the things they said are just, it's almost poetic. They were saying beautiful things in a time of tragedy where I don't know that I would be so well spoken while I knew I was going to die. Freezing to death. I don't think I would have been saying things about flowers and apologizing.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know.
Yeah, you kind of but there you go. You don't.
Yeah.
We'll
you
never
don't know.
Hopefully, we'll never.
Hopefully, we'll never know, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
like where your character will lie at that. Where your presence of mind.
I don't think I will find myself anywhere near the top of a 23,000 foot peak.
Hopefully, not anytime soon. No, anytime soon.
I don't have any plans. It would have to be like a plane wreck to get me there.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
I'm not going to be.
Which we've already established we'll be well dressed for.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, we'll be wearing all the right. So we'll be fine.
If I'm flying over the Pamirs, I should come with crampons.
Yeah, in previous episode we covered all of this. Right?
Ice axe and
so you're
climbing
good.
rope. I know exactly.
Good. I think that's probably it right there.
Yes, always be prepared.
Be prepared. All right, everybody. That is Help Is Not on the Way. Another episode.
All right. Till next time.
Till next time.